Welcome to the Flourishing Through Adversity podcast with me, Dr. Kevin Ellers. You know, life challenges all of us. We have setbacks and struggles, loss, and traumatic events that can sometimes rock us to our very core. But life shouldn't be just about surviving these tough times. It should be about learning how to leverage these events as fuel for growth. What we do in the aftermath matters. So grab your headphones and take a breath, and let's dive in as we explore the neurobiology, relational, and spiritual dimensions of flourishing through adversity. Hello, my friend. Thanks for tuning in. This is the very first episode of the Flourishing Through Adversity podcast. So I want to address right up front why the question some of my friends are asking me, why are you starting a podcast now at the age of getting ready to turn to 60 here? So today is actually February the 14th, which is Valentine's Day. And I'm getting ready for a date with my hot little wife here in a few hours, but it takes her like 3 hours to get ready. So I have some time to kill today. But I got this morning, I was having my quiet time, my devotional time. And I realized today is the anniversary. A year ago today, I quit my job with the Salvation Army after 30 years. And I loved it. I was a director of disaster services for the 11 central states. And I had hit this 30-year mark with them. And I was standing there at the casket of my dead grandma who made it to like mid-90s and January. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm done. I felt God had this very distinct moment with me as I was standing there. It's like, okay, you're going to be in this casket someday. And I have something different for you. And so I literally went back the next day or a few days after that, and I turned in my resignation to the Salvation Army and retired after 30 years of wonderful ministry. I just loved the disaster, crisis, and trauma and grief world with them. I'd always done a lot of stuff on the side and on the weekends with helping people recover from really adverse impacts in their life, and so I really didn't know what was next. I just jumped. I just felt like God was leading me to make this move, and it was interesting. In that last year or so, I had been spending a lot of time asking, what is next for me? I didn't know I was going to be leaving. I really intended to go another 5 years and retire at age 65. But I just got this growing sense, and I kept hearing this inner voice saying, feed my sheep. And so you're familiar with the passage, feed my sheep, take care of my lambs, right? Where Jesus says this. And so I was like, yeah, okay, I'm already doing that. Like I've written the curriculum. I teach all across the country, lots of different groups. I do the coaching. I feel like I'm doing a lot of this. What would it look like to do this more? And I kept coming back to that passage. So one day I get up in the morning and I go out into the barn, and there laying on the floor was this. Now, if that's not a sheep, I don't know what is. The birds had pulled some insulation out of the ceiling of my barn and picked this thing, and it was laying flat on the ground. The second miracle was the goats that were in there had not eaten this. I mean, they love to eat stuff like this all the time. And so there's pictures of this sheep laying. I was just like, okay, God, I get it. Now, what does this look like? And what was really even more confusing, because I was going to the zoo with my wife and my daughters, and we're driving down past this road, and there was this passage there on the sign outside this church that said, feed my sheep. And then right after that, it said spaghetti. And then it talked about dinner that was coming up. So it was like, okay, feed my sheep spaghetti. So I was, sometimes I always joke with people and say, I'm not sure if it's God or the burrito talking, but after seeing this little sheep, I just thought it was very clear, but I really didn't know what that was supposed to be. And so as it came on, I kind of felt I was supposed to start maybe a podcast so I could reach more people and keep in contact with the people who goes through my classes, because I get a lot of questions from people. And we have the 2-day classes that I teach they're really intensive. There's lots of stuff we're going through and have a lot of discussion and stuff, but there's a lot of topics people will bring up, and we just can't keep off on all those rabbit trails where the 2-day 14-hour class would turn into, for 4 weeks or so. But so I've been making a list of all these questions that people were asking. And so I wanted to address some of those things a little bit more. So I have my really professional handwritten notes that nobody else or probably myself could even read here. So we're going to kind of walk through is why I started that. So first of all, when I kept arguing with God about starting this podcast because I'm like, look, I've got a face made for radio and a voice made for silent movies. So you're really asking me to do a podcast. Those of you who know me, I do not like social media. Some guy was like getting all upset with me the other day because he had left some face messages on, I think it's called Messenger or Facebook. Like, I don't even look at Facebook, like, ever. Happy to get on to find something on Facebook Marketplace. I did to figure out how to use that. And there was like 5 messages one day from this guy. I'm like, so I say, look, I don't ever check this. I don't do this stuff. So it really isn't my greatest strength here. Much rather see people in person and work with them, one-on-one or whatever. But it's this kind of growing call that I feel here. But I wanted to talk about some of these things we're going to talk about. And one of the things this comes out of is this whole concepts that I find in people. There's a lot of myths out there with people in general. And there's a lot of myths specifically, even in the church, about how the adverse things that we go through in life scars us forever and makes us kind of incapable of ever surviving and being happy and healthy and growth. And so people don't directly say that, but when I listen to their narratives, especially as a coach or in some of these classes, I find this. However, after 40 years of frontline service, that has not been the case that I found to be with many, many people. Now, there are some people who go through adverse circumstances and they don't do well. They continue down a path and they start drinking and doing drugs or, compulsive relationships, or they put on 100 pounds or whatever. But there are people who do not just survive these things, but actually thrive. And so one of the things I've been doing for years is documenting some of these stories with people, and I've used them in my class. Like there's 5 courses that I teach that are full 2-day courses. One is the spiritual psychological first aid course, the grief following trauma, the emotional spiritual care and disasters course, the understanding suicide course. And there's one we called stress, compassion, fatigue, and resilience, and I've changed that name in the past couple of years to the reset factor, and that stands for something. Then there's a bunch of other courses that I teach, like the role of chaplain, those type of things, for a lot of different groups. But one of the things that consistently comes up in these classes are some of these topics, and I just want people to understand that you can not just survive these things, but can really grow through these things that you have experienced in your life. But I want to say something to you very clearly, because I've spent a lot of time with a lot of people and thousands of hours across from people, first as a pastor and then as a married to family therapist. And then now I work as more as a coach. I love the coaching model. We'll talk more about that. But what you do matters in the aftermath of this. And so I do find people who have an adverse event, whatever that is, a major loss or trauma or upset in their life, and they don't necessarily do well. They sit around and they're griping, complaining the rest of their life, and they have anger and they have bitterness in their heart. And some just go in this decline and they end up ruining their marriages or relationship with their kids and all kinds of stuff and cut themselves off from society. But I find others who step into this stuff, they face into their losses, they face into whatever happened to them. And these people not only just survive that, but they're amazing humans. And the reason I know that, because I have walked along beside these people for many years, working at things like 9/11s and Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Harveys and shootings and all this stuff that happens, and they're amazing helpers. And so they have learned from those experiences, and it's helped them become more compassionate. It has helped them to grow in their relationship with others, and it creates an increasing sense of awareness of the world. And I think that God often uses these things to help us to grow. And I can certainly say this for myself. I have grown more from the hard things of my life than I ever have from any of the limited successes that I've had over the last basically 60 years of my life. And so I want to just, through these different stories and the people that I interview and these authors, really begin to confront some of those myths about that, and then really help people to understand the trajectory of what happens with that. The other thing is I'm very selective who I work with these days. I've wasted a lot of time with some people through the years that really weren't at a place that they were ready to really do their work. And so one of the things I go through in pretty intensive screening uh, session with people before we commit to the coaching practice, because I have a limited amount of time. One of the things that those of you who know me, I love life. I just have this love for life. I've got it from my mom and my dad. And my mom's in her early 80s now and traveling all over the country and still, just has this love for people and for life. And my dad was the same way. He unfortunately died of cancer at age 67. We'll talk about that later. But I want to confront some of these myths, but I want to help people like you to have hope that you can grow and be transformed by the things that you have experienced that are hard. But what you do, like I said before, matters. And I'm going to keep saying that to people because I find a lot of people just passively sit back and let life happen to them. So this past year has really led me to really be thinking about where I need to focus my time and my energy and things. And so one of the biggest places I've done is known in the disaster world, and not only for the Salvation Army, but some of you are familiar with VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. We had a national committee for there. We brought all these different groups of government and non-government and church groups and, businesses together, and we had these different committees. And I was chair of the Emotional and Spiritual Care Committee nationally. And that was a really a great committee and so many amazing people on there. But one of the spaces I've always loved is grief. Because I think grief has a way of turning our life upside down when we've had something or somebody that we have lost, and it really makes us look. I think grief is really soul work. It's spirit work. And I don't think you can really heal from and grow after a major loss until you have really stepped into that. And that's a hard and a scary place. And so we're going to spend these first couple sessions talking about that. But the next session, I want to talk about what was a kind of pivotal move for me when I moved from the little place we lived before, Crystal Lake, and about a half an hour away, and bought this farm and got the horses and this place I call Reset Ranch, where we work at the horses. I'm not sure when you're watching this. I may be 80 by the time you watch this, if the internet's still going and the world hasn't fallen apart or destroyed. It's not necessarily a bad thing, I guess. But we're going to talk about some of these things. And so what I want to do is just kind of set the stage for why I'm doing this. It really is to connect you as a human being with other human beings who have gone before you. And that you can learn from their mistakes, you can learn from their successes, and you can learn what kept them going, and as you hear and share those stories. We as human beings are designed for relationships, but we are people of story. Do you ever think about that? If you've ever read this Bible through in its entirety, which you haven't, you should, it is full of one story after another. If you open up Genesis, it starts with the whole creation story of human beings and God and what that was supposed to be like, and then our actions and our choices and the consequences of those things. And you see Adam and Eve, the first people who were created and put on this earth, and then you see the result of their choices, and then all of a sudden they become homeless and they get kicked out of Eden, and then one of their sons kills the other son. And there's all this stuff going on. And then you go after person after person after person. And if you look at this, there's all these stories that tell us something. Adam and Eve did not have a Bible. They couldn't even read. They couldn't write. There was any of that stuff there. But what they had was a direct individual and personal relationship with the Almighty God. And that is transformative. And so now we're fortunate to have scripture and all these things and all these, theological references and books out here that our first civilizations did not have. But in some ways, I think we have to be careful because we have often replaced God with these human creations. I'm not saying these human creations were not divinely inspired, maybe expired. Some of them have expired actually, but inspired. But what I'm saying is the primacy of that needs to be us figuring out why we're on this planet and what we're supposed to do here, and more importantly, how we're supposed to connect with the great God of this cosmos, who we will never fully understand. We can't really understand God. God is greater than understanding. He's incomprehensible in the greatness and magnitude He is. But this God, who is so great, can be known, and can be known intimately, and can be known personally. And that's what I want to give you hope, because when we tap into that, then that is the one key factor that can be transformative in our lives. So one of the things, looking at my list here, I have found people saying over and over to me as I'm teaching in these classes is there's this theme of loneliness and disconnection. Sometimes it's a disconnection within ourselves. We don't know who we are. A large connection, a disconnected with being disconnected from God. And a lot of times feeling disconnected from those around us. I find people who've been in the church sometimes for 15, 20, 30 years, and they feel lonely. They walk in and out of that building every single week, and they listen to the sermons and sing the songs, but sometimes they feel like I sit here and I'm feeling all alone. And this is a lot of times really exacerbated after a major loss or trauma. It's like, do you see me? Do you see me hurting here? Do you get me? And so this is what we're looking at, starting this as a flourishing through disasters support group. And I'm primarily, as I'm focusing this, will be on helpers, those who are influencers, to sustain them. I find so many pastors who started out when I did, who are no longer there as pastors or therapists or even helpers. And so sometimes God calls us for a season, but a lot of times people just got burned out. And so what is it that keeps us sustaining? So I want to kind of sustain the troops as they're out there. And so, but we are designed for connection. And I think we all have these phones and all this stuff, and sometimes our connections are judged by how many followers we have, or how many likes we get on a post or something like that. Oh, it drives me nuts. But so for me, I don't really care if I get 6 people watching this. If I got 1 person watching this, and this helps specifically like you, then it's worth my time. And so if God sends 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, then I guess that's even better. But I really don't care, because right now I'm doing this out of obedience, because God's been telling me, feed my sheep. What am I supposed to feed you? It's not completely clear yet, but we will talk about some of the neurobiology pieces of who we are and how we're designed and how we connect and what helps us to face into trauma. And more specifically, we're going to talk about the spiritual dimensions of that. So some people have been asking me in our classes about how this fits in with everything else. So when I announced to Salvation Army that I was leaving, and I kind of jumped and left, it had been I'd just been retired for like 2-3 weeks, I think. And I had been teaching for the K-Love radio station for a long time. I helped them get their crisis response training program up and running. I was their first trainer for that. And Jennifer then trained for them. But I didn't have a lot of time to do that, because I had a full-time job. So I'd work, weekends, take vacation time to do that. But they came to me after that. They were moving, and they asked me to take over this program. So to do that, I had to start up a nonprofit, and they kind of spun that off and gave me some money to start. Before that, I had what I call Institute for Compassionate Care for a long time, and that was the group that was my private ministry thing that I did here with Jennifer, and that was my teaching arm and also the helping arm of that. And then I started Reset Life Coaching after that, and that was really to help people with the healing piece of that, but really help them to really look at their lives and be committed to a growth period in their life where we would work through some things and really help them to really grow. So those are the 3 pieces that people often ask, and so they all work collaboratively. And through the Crisis Response Care, CRC, we're going to be offering a lot of free classes. We just ask people for a donation to come back to sustain that. And then with the Institute for Compassionate Care, I teach a lot of the CISM, the Critical Incident Stress Management classes, and one of the big things is I'm creating on that is a grief group that you'll not only just take the curriculum you need to be a chaplain or whatever, but you'll be a part of a group, a cohort where you go through that, and then we'll have some ongoing dialogue with that hopefully, and we're looking at some mechanisms to be able to create a community so we can have some ongoing dialogue, just not have a 2-day class and then we're done. And so this free check-in, I'm not sure how frequent it's going to be right now, probably once a month to start out with. The Flourishing Through Adversity thing. We'll put people in breakout groups so they can talk about things, and I'll give them specific topics to talk about and some questions to discuss with each other that can help to keep you accountable and help you to achieve your goals for growing to be a more healthy human being and to flourish through adversity. So welcome to this podcast. I've got some great stuff lined up. I've got a couple of things I've already done some interviews with people. Some of them will be live, but most of the time they'll be taped. And then we will probably coordinate this with the group discussion after this live on certain times of the month. So tune back, go to crisisresponse.org or the Institute for Compassionate Care or Reset Life Coaching, and you will find out some more. So I will post more updates as we go along. So welcome to this first episode, and this is just the beginning piece of that, and we'll see where God takes us from there. So may God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you, be gracious upon you, and may he turn his face to and smile upon you, and